Being a mom is the toughest job there is, and it doesn't come with instructions. So, it's okay if you don't have all the answers. We'll figure it out together. This is Mom Brain with Hilaria Baldwin and Daphne Oz.
So we're going to jump in because I know, Adam, you have to get to one of the thousands of talks. I mean, this guy, your brain is so in demand, and it's so brilliant because I feel like when you started talking about kindness, compassion, leadership by getting away from groupthink, it was kind of novel. Like no one really knew what that was. And now, and rightfully so, you are sort of the expert in the field. And how you've tied that into raising strong children and compassionate children and kind children. And obviously, as a dad of 3 yourself, this is both personal experience and professional experience. I'm just dying to hear your thoughts on that and how we can do that at home. Just for people listening at home, Adam, and I met when he was my husband's professor at business school at Wharton. And I was like, who's this student who's teaching your class? Because he's 12 years old. And they quickly became fast friends. And the rest is just us becoming like weird fans of Adam's and just trailing him around the world. But yeah, so tell everybody a little bit about this research and what we can be doing at home to raise compassionate, kind, smart, resilient kids.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Daphne. I don't. It's pretty much downhill from here, I can assure you. But
she makes you sound really good.
I know. I should just quit.
It's all true.
I just want Daphne to describe me every day.
You could be an agent in your spare time. But no, I mean, I don't actually know anything about parenting, right? So I'm trained as an organizational psychologist. I try to figure out how to make work not suck. And after I wrote my first book, which was on generosity in the workplace, I kept getting people reaching out saying, how do I raise a kid to be a giver and to be kind and compassionate? I'm like, I don't know. I don't study kids. I study adults. And eventually I just got tired of not having an answer to the question and also realized that I was trying to teach our kids to develop those values. And so I started reading all this research and was really surprised by one of the things I learned. I'm like, there's got to be more. And so now I have things to say about this that may or may not be true. Where do you want to start?
Well, all of this stuff is opinions. But, I think that's one of the most important things that you brought up already is our job as parents is preparing our children to become adults. So if you know a lot about adult stuff and being a good person and stuff like that, it's kind of like, well, how to get there. So I feel like you are an expert, Adam.
Well,
and you're a dad of 3, so you definitely are. How old are your kids?
So our kids are 10, 7, and 5.
You know.
My wife always laughs at me when I give parenting advice. She's like, if people could only see you at home.
But the hardest
do as I
thing
say,
is
not as I do.
We'll start with this. Start with the world is a hard place and the world is a critical place, especially with social media at play. And how do you raise kids who are resilient to that constant onslaught of information, criticism, comparison, just outside influence, and how do you control against that?
Yeah, I think this is really hard. And I guess the giant caveat on this whole conversation is it's extremely difficult to be a good parent, but it's very easy to be a bad parent. And so I actually think it's more important just to not screw up your kids than it is to, try to become like a superhuman mom who's going to create the best kids ever. I think when it comes to resilience, I worry a lot about kids not feeling like they matter. So one of the biggest drivers of having strength in the face of adversity is saying, look, I matter in the sense that I know other people notice me, they care about me. And I think most parents are good at actually showing that to their kids, right? That's part of unconditional love and, making kids sort of feel like they're one of the most important things, if not the most important thing in your life. There's another part of mattering, though, that I think most parents miss, which is also knowing that other people rely on you, right? That you make a difference, that your actions count. And I think that so often we're worried about protecting kids that we don't actually give them a chance to show up for other people, right? To show that their actions have some impact too. And so one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is how to help kids, really feel like other people need them, depend on them, value them. And one of the ways that I've tried to do this with our kids a little bit is I've started asking them for advice when I have dilemmas. So
that's so great.
I'm going to go on stage. I have to speak in front of a big audience. I'm really nervous. What should I do? And they start giving me tips. And I'm like, well, I can use some of this. But also next time they're nervous, they're going to know that they can rely on themselves, right? In the same way that I relied on them and that I have confidence in them to handle these kinds of challenges. And I think we ought to do that more often.
That is so great.
Isn't
I'm
that
gonna
amazing?
I'll do things. My kids are a lot smaller than yours. Not a lot.
Yeah, I wouldn't ask them for advice yet, Hilaria.
No, I think
Go really badly.
I'm totally. Yeah, but
Hey,
I
guys,
might
what
not
should we
take
eat for
it, but
dinner?
I think it's important. Exactly right. They'll be like candy,
Ice cream.
candy. No, but I mean, I noticed that my kids want to carry packages, and we live in New York, so we get packages delivered, and they want to carry them upstairs, and they want to help. They want to help cook. I mean, Daphne cooks with her kids all the time. They want to be useful.
They do.
And I think so often, because we know that it's not going to usually end up well. And it's going to end up being more work for us. We're like, oh, no, fine. You sit there and here's a book or an iPad.
Yep.
And I will do this. And then they get used to that. I mean, I have my kids, mostly my boys, because they're obsessed with the vacuum cleaner. So after a meal, because there's a lot of food on the floor, they clean the floor afterwards. And I feel like it's just great. They're like, yes, great, time to clean the floor. And one has like a broom, one has a vacuum, the other one has a dustbuster, and it's fantastic.
It's amazing.
This is why she has so many kids. So she's an incredible cleaning
just
staff.
work for me.
They just,
Exactly.
we got a
Best.
dustbuster, a broom, a dustpan, the whole
and
thing.
I'm getting them young so they can really
A
learn.
mop, there's a
No
Swiffer
bad
coming
habits.
afterwards. I love that.
That might be illegal, but go on.
She
They
pays
work
them
for
in
food.
pays them in gummies. But I love that, and I think something else that gets to is this idea of kids being able to contribute. And I love, Adam, for you, it's in the advice and Hilaria, and just making sure that the family's sort of running and that there's a schedule to the day and that they know they have a role to play in that. This is taking me back to, there was an article, and I don't remember which specific one it was. It was a couple of years ago that Adam had written, and it was about kids. The way that you compliment your children. And I think this is something that I contend with a lot. You know, when your child does something great, are you meant to say, you did a great job, and how do you separate from, you did a great job because you're super smart and you're always going to be that way, and then as soon as something doesn't come easily to them, they are completely disoriented? Or you did a good job because you're a good person, or you did a good job because you worked really hard, and even if you didn't actually get, I mean, my kids aren't getting graded yet, but theoretically you didn't get an A, but you worked really hard, and that's what I value. And this article really went back and forth between how you raise good kids and also how you motivate kids. And I just want to, because it took me a few reads to really have it sink in and make it part of my way of parenting. I'd love you to give people your sort of background in that and just how to think through that for kids of all ages.
I'll try.
I
Here
know,
goes.
it's complicated, but it's amazingly brilliant, and it made so much sense once I got it.
Well, I haven't read it yet, so I just
He wrote it in a former lifetime.
No, it really, it's where I started when I was trying to figure out, how do I teach kids to be generous? And I realized that I was praising our kids wrong. That whenever, I think you always want to catch your kids doing good, right? It's very hard to motivate them to do it, but when they spontaneously do it, it's like, I can jump in and reinforce that and let them know how great it is. And so I would always say things like, oh, thank you so much for helping. Our kids love to help me take out the garbage. That's their idea of fun for some reason. And so I'm like, wow, that was so generous. And then I read all this research showing that it's actually better to compliment their character and say, you are so generous, right? Instead of thank you for helping, thank you for being a helper. And what seems to be the case is when you praise their character, they internalize it as part of their identity.
Right.
And so a few weeks later, they've got an opportunity to help out somewhere else. They're like, oh, that's what kind of person I am. And that seems to have the most impact when kids are about 8 to 10, which is when they're really crystallizing a sense of self. So if it's earlier than that, then they're like, nah, I don't really know who I am yet. If it's later, you're screwed. It's just too late. But I think that the tricky thing about that is that there is some evidence. There's actually a study that came out this morning showing that when you tell kids they're helpers, if they then fail to help, they get really discouraged because either they feel ashamed or they feel like they fell short of the person they're supposed to be. I think you have to be really careful about this and say, look, I believe you are a giving person, but that's an identity you have to earn every day through your actions, right? And you don't just get to give up one day and say, I'm not able to live up to it.
Actually.
Yeah, which is really sad. But it is interesting, even when kids are as young as 3, you get a 22 to 29% increase in how likely they are to help. If instead of saying, will you help, you say, will you be a helper?
Oh, interesting.
Because even at 3, they want to earn that identity,
yes,
right?
Absolutely. Now, what about, going back to what you just said, what about when it didn't work out and being able to process that with them, or when they did behave badly? So I had an experience with my middle son, so Rafa, who's 3, and Leo, who's 2, and they were fighting with each other, which they don't do too much, but they will do. And Rafa bit Leo on the back. Yeah, it was a big
My
moment.
sister did that to me once.
And Leo comes running and he has a bite mark. And he's actually a little bit sometimes the tougher one of the two. And Rafa's they're sweet and he'll kind of cry about it and talk about it a little bit more. But like Leo will like chuck a table at you because he's like a giant baby.
Because he's the third child and
he has to because he has to. And he comes running crying and I pick him up and I go in there and it's like I can feel the steam coming out of my ears. And I am ready to do the worst thing in the world, which is shame him. And I see him and he's sitting on his bed and he's saying, "Mommy, am I bad? Am I bad, Mommy? Am I bad?" And crying. And then like my whole body melted and I was like, "No, you're not bad." I said, "You're not bad. You're good, but you did something that was bad and we can't do it." And then it was amazing to watch them like hug each other and kiss each other and make up and be really sweet. But it was that place where I could have really done it wrong. And so how would you talk parents through kind of getting to a place where we can let them solve their own problems, let them be wrong, and have it be okay?
I do exactly what you did, actually. I think the shame response is so common,
Yeah.
right? To lead kids feeling they kind of feel like they're small.
Yeah.
I'm worthless. I feel like I should just now run away and try to escape ever getting into a situation
Right.
like this again. And I think the idea is to try to not make them feel ashamed, but to make them feel guilty, which you do by saying you're a good person, but you did a bad thing. I think kids have a hard time processing that, right? To separate, my actions from my
From myself.
character.
Yeah.
And so I think one way to deal with that is to introduce them to role models who, may be heroes in one way, but also were not perfect in their lives. I think it's why kids love, like the George Washington story with the cherry tree, whether it's true or not. They get to see somebody who's a real moral role model,
Who
saying
would you say
was
are
not
good
honest.
moral role models these days?
These days, I think it's hard to argue with Malala. I think she's a great choice. Actually, one of my favorites, though, is Harry Potter. So there's a bunch of research showing that when kids read Harry Potter, they become less prejudiced.
Really?
Interesting.
Yeah, because they look at the way that muggles are looked
Muggles,
down
yeah.
on, and they're like, wow, it's so horrible that wizards are nasty to humans. And that actually extends to the way they think about people.
Interesting.
Oh, I love that. I think when you look at any sort of tales of heroes, there's always complication. There's always a conflict in their character, something they have to work through. And to tell, that's what's so tricky is how do you not shame your kids when they do something wrong? How do you separate action from person and at a young age? And I love that you're praising, the giver. You're praising that you
Yeah.
are generous because you are a good person, but you don't do bad things because you're a bad person. And how do you, separate those
Yeah.
two? We're obviously talking about children and that being a critical relationship between parent and child, but between spouses or between partners in
Or
parenting.
between yourself. It's so
Or
funny.
to
We've
yourself.
spent so much time together
We're
already.
brain
I'm
melting
literally
over
thinking
here.
the same thing at the same time. I mean, that's something that I've struggled with as an adult is, am I what I do?
Mhm.
And how do you not label yourself and how do you forgive yourself? Because, the example they just give, I mean, I have my moments where I just want to like climb under a rug and I'm like, oh God. I mean, how do we deal with that? And again, in relationships as well.
Yeah, there's a psychologist, Kristen Neff, who has these cool studies on self-compassion, where she says what we're worst at is extending the kindness and understanding to ourselves that we would give to a good friend. So, when a good friend falls short, do you say like, wow, you're a horrible person. I wish you didn't exist. No, no, you say, hey, like, I know you had good intentions. You might have made a few mistakes here, but I still see a lot of good in you. And what Kristen does is she has people, after they go through either an embarrassment or a failure or a big setback, she has them write a letter to themselves like they would if they were writing to a friend.
Mm.
And then in doing that, they're like, wow, you know what? This is a totally reasonable mistake to have made. And I'm going to take responsibility for fixing it as opposed to feeling like this is going to define me.
But I do think, in addition to that, it's nice to have a group of people around you who can echo that same message. Because I mean, I could write myself a letter and I'm like, everything is fine, it's gonna be okay. But then if I walk out and everybody's like glaring at you, then I don't know if I'd believe myself.
Yeah, I don't think we could underestimate the value of a support network,
Support
right?
system,
I
yeah.
don't think we should. I think that it's obviously critical to have people reinforce that message, but I think too often we don't listen to them.
Yeah.
And we're
No,
like,
it's
yeah,
true.
they're just being nice to me because they're my friend.
Right.
Well, their job is to tell you the truth, but also to encourage you.
Well, the other thing, when my friends will say that to me when I'm giving them advice, I'll say, it's my choice that I'm your friend. I don't have to be your friend.
Right.
it is my choice. And
Yeah.
I show up because I love you and I care about you and I really believe what I say.
That's a great response.
Thanks.
I love that too. Um, talking about generosity and generosity being something that what I've always been sort of amazed by is that your research oftentimes reinforces that good things that you're always told you should be generous, you should be a nice person, you should be compassionate, you should be thoughtful. But in theory, and you're told that in a vacuum, and your research actually backs it up that it actually will make you more successful to be this way, make you happier to be this way. I'm really curious though about how you're generous, and I think we were getting to this, how you're generous to yourself. But how are you generous? You have a beautiful wife, you have a wonderful, loving family. But it's a busy and chaotic family, and you guys are pulled in all different directions, and I'm sure there's a lot of stress involved. How do you stay generous with each other? How do you make time for each other? And you being the expert that you are in this space, how are you the expert at home?
I'm not, right, is the short answer. I think the most useful thing that Allison and I have done is we actually have a weekly meeting where I know it sounds
On
incredibly
the calendar?
weird.
Like,
yes.
like date night or like
No,
weekly
it's
meeting?
meeting night. Meeting night. I'm
Sounds
not
romantic.
kidding. I know it's
Well, there's
it's
sex afterwards.
Yeah.
something to look forward to every week. But what happened was once we had kids and then I started traveling more, we would just have these things pile up that we each needed to talk to the other about. And like our whole relationship became about, okay, who's going to pick the kids up on which day? And, how are we going to handle this dilemma we have around, some decision we have to make in the house? And quickly we were like, wow, we don't want to have these conversations every day. They're really boring. And then we feel like we're nagging each other constantly. And so we sat down and said, all right, what if we just have a once a week check-in where like Allison will give me her to-do list of all the things that she needs me to do. And I usually have a bunch of things that I'm asking for her advice or help on. And then throughout the week, we actually have more interesting and meaningful conversations. We also, like, I know during that week, if I don't get the stuff done, that she's going to be really disappointed when we get to meeting night. And so what's funny is we wrote a little article about this. I've had about 100 emails from people I already knew who said, oh my gosh, we've been doing that. Like, I do that with my partner. We've been doing it for years. And I thought I was the weird one. I'm like, no, you're still weird. But at least
we're
not,
weird
you're not the only
together.
weird one.
In a good way.
I love that because I do think that it's so easy to have, especially as parents to young kids or kids who need a lot from you, to have the bulk of your relationship become about task mastering. Like, did you send the tuition payment? Did you pick the costume up from whatever? And I think it does start to feel negative and naggy, like you said. And my intention is never to be that person. I dread becoming that person. But if you don't have a dedicated forum to do it in, then you just get it in wherever you can. So we're having these periodic conversations throughout the day. And not only is it probably not as effective because you're not writing it down and you're not really remembering what they told you. You're just remembering being irritated that they told you to do that again.
Yeah.
And I love that you kind of just bulk it's like a pill, right? It's like your vitamins. You take your vitamins and then you get to have the fun meal together or whatever and actually talk about your lives, yourselves, remaining intact in that relationship that was the foundation for your family. That's
exactly the case for it. Although I'm always worried, like this idea came from having weekly meetings at work. And I'm like, there should be a don't try this at home label on a lot of it. But I actually think there's a reason we have weekly check-ins with our colleagues and our bosses, and isn't our relationship with our spouse just as important?
And our home is a little bit like a little
office.
A little office,
Yes.
a little business. Women. So women, once we, get pregnant, have our baby, become so focused on these other little beings, I think sometimes we can either forget about our spouse's needs, in needs in many, some of us, or we can feel very insecure. And how do you, from a man's perspective, how do you keep connected to your spouse? How can you, because a lot of people say, okay, my kids are 18 years old, they're out of the house, and I look at my spouse and we don't have anything in common anymore, aside from your weekly meetings.
How do I answer this without mansplaining? I think is a tough one.
That's why you're here.
Well, okay, here we go
Yes,
then.
dadsplain it to us.
Let me tell you
dadsplain it.
exactly how to run your relationship.
Okay.
Here we go. I have a roadmap. No, I think probably the place I would start is there's I always go to the research, right? Because I feel like, I could make stuff up as a husband or a dad, but I'd rather ask what works for a lot of people.
Right.
And there's this research I love by John Gottman, who got married couples together. And I think rather famously at this point, he had people watch them interact, and then he tried to predict for the next 15 years which ones would separate. And he was able to predict divorce rates with over 90% accuracy
Wow.
just from a 15-minute interaction. And what's so interesting that comes out of this is it kind of reinforces the point about parenting that we talked about earlier, which is bad is stronger than good. It might be more important to get rid of the bad stuff than to add a bunch of good stuff. And so the couples that end up getting divorced, one of the things they do is they're having like a 15-minute conversation about who's going to walk the dog or who's going to do the laundry or make dinner. And then you start to see these flashes of contempt where you're like, wow, this person hates my guts. And that's really damaging to a marriage, right? When you're looking at the person that you love and you're seeing that they really just despise you in that moment. And so I think one of the things is to just try to get inside your partner's head a little bit and say, look, behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, right? And so, like, if you're dealing with your husband and he's driving you insane, just to show a desire to understand where he's coming from and say, hey, wait a minute, I'm not asking you to make excuses for your behavior. I just want to understand what's behind your behavior so I can make sense of it. I think that understanding is really valuable and seems to actually help couples stay together.
I think intentions. I always try to look at intentions whenever I'm talking about with anyone, let alone Alec for sure, but anyone. Because if you had good intentions going into it, if it didn't turn out great, you deal with that.
I totally love that, but I also men always have good intentions, don't they? Right? And so there's this other side of it, which is okay, but sometimes your behavior actually has to live up to what you wanted,
of course. It's not to say that it's
freebie.
okay.
It's not
a freebie. But if
free
you
card.
have bad intentions going into, or you were like snarky, or you kind of glared at the person. I mean, all these things that happen in relationships just from living. Even if you have a great relationship, you have your moments, And so I think I
feel much better now.
You feel better?
There's not a pass. Good.
Yeah, no passes. No passes.
I think it's interesting also. I do feel this way, and I feel this way for children and for adults. The end goal is just to be understood. So many of my children's tantrums are just because they don't know how to communicate what they're feeling, what they're trying to get, what they're going through. They're kids. They don't know how to access that. No one ever teaches you how to access that. And so as adults, it's completely realistic and normal. If there are times when you're like, I'm angry or I'm frustrated by this. I'm thinking about the words that my 2-year-old uses. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm hungry. Hangry is a big thing in our house too. And as a wife, I feel like I spend a lot of my emotional energy trying to understand more for my children and for my husband, because I totally think you're right. I mean, couples fight. Couples are, antagonistic. Sometimes you know how to push each other's buttons because you're with each other all the time. But as your intention should always be to find common ground and to have it be a positive and loving and nurturing relationship. And their study you referenced, the hardest emotion to overcome is disgust. And I think you only get there when you stop trying to understand where they're coming from and only hear and feel how it's affecting you. Are there any coping mechanisms to like, if you are already in that place and it's so hard to pull back, but if you're already there, is there anything you can do to pull back from that?
Yeah, I think the good news on that is it's not how frequently you argue that affects the quality of your marriage or whether it survives or also how well adjusted your kids are. It's how constructively you argue.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can disagree constantly, but if you show a little bit of respect for the other person's side, one of the things we see that couples who disagree a lot, sort of in a healthy way, do it is they actually laugh while they're arguing, right? And so they'll add in little jokes. My wife and I had a funny example of this. We were really just at complete odds over a contract we had to sign, and there was this weird clause in the contract. I think Allison had read it 4 times, and I apparently had not read it as carefully as I should have, and she was really unhappy about it. There's this clause in the contract that says confidential information may not be left in bathrooms. Like, what the hell is that? And I was like skimming through, and she kind of interrupted and said, I have something really important that we need to edit in this contract. It doesn't mention that we also have to keep confidential information out of gondolas. I just started cracking up. I'm like, what the hell is that? And we just lost it laughing about the idea that you would accidentally be in a gondola and leave some secret information.
Dirigibles, gondolas, and bathrooms off limits.
Yeah, but it totally changed the tone of the disagreement. And then she actually said, why don't we write this into the contract? And the people on the other side either didn't catch it or they signed it. So it's in the contract.
Oh, that's amazing.
So now I'm really nervous every time I go into a gondola.
Don't leave anything.
No, but I think those kinds of jokes are really valuable in arguments. And I think we forget to make them, or we think it's dangerous to make them, but that's exactly what helps you say, like, okay, even though it feels like we're not okay in this conversation, at a deeper level, we are okay.
Yeah, I always say to my husband, I know I'm going to hold I'm going to hold the knowledge that everything's going to be okay.
Hmm.
So let's be good problem solvers right now. Let's solve this problem. And I have the perspective to know that tomorrow will come and everything is going to be okay. And even if it feels like it's a big deal right now, in the grand scheme of things, it really isn't a big deal. Now, what about arguing and children? What about those moments where you get on how do you treat your spouse in front of your children? It's hard. It's really hard to go and say, okay, I'm going to save this for later. Because even
Yeah.
if you go and you close the door and you're in the other room, your kids know.
Yeah. I think I was reading some of the studies on highly creative adults, which showed that they're more likely to grow up in families where their parents disagreed in front of them. And, it's not like they were having fistfights, right?
Right.
But their parents are, saying, look, I think you're wrong on this, or I have a different point of view. And, they're having really heated debates. And I think what that does for kids is it shows them, there's not always one right answer.
Right.
And when kids see their parents argue thoughtfully, they learn how to do that themselves. But they also say, okay, I can't just follow, what my mom and dad want me to do. I now have to think for myself. And it teaches them to be a little bit more independent in their thinking. And so I think probably the best way to approach that is to teach your kids what a debate is as
Mhm.
early as possible.
Wait, you just hit on something so critical though.
Uh-oh.
How do you teach kids to be self-motivated and not to do things for the approval of their parents or their peers, or worse even than that, external influences you can't control?
So I would probably defer that question to Dan Pink, who wrote a great book called Drive, which is all about intrinsic motivation and how you cultivate it. I think the biggest thing that I took away from that is kids need autonomy, right? Where kids are autonomous creatures from the get-go, right? And like the moment you have a 2-year-old and you start to tell them what to do, that like the tantrum they show in response is a clear sign that you just threaten their freedom of choice. And I think that we probably don't give kids enough choices. I remember when our oldest was a toddler, she was pushing back on rules that we would set, and eventually we would just say, "Look, you have 3 choices. Here are the 3 options for dinner. Which one do you want?" And just instead of imposing one, this is what's for dinner. Once she got to choose one, it's like, now I own that decision. Of course, I love carrots. And I
My
think that
kids
helps.
choose option number 4.
Oh yeah, that's
That
a
never
problem.
worked out well for me. Did
All
it
of
work
the
for
above?
you?
It
No,
doesn't work
they're
with
like,
every kid.
They're like, that won't work. I'm actually going to choose, chocolate cake.
Oh, there's a response to that though.
Which
Okay,
is?
so can you play one of your kids right now?
Can
Hilaria?
Play Carmen.
Okay, I'm
Go ahead.
okay. So
All
I'm
right, so
Carmen.
what are your-
I don't want to eat my vegetables.
Okay, so 0 to 10, where 10 is the most delicious thing you can imagine, and 0 is the most disgusting thing you've ever tasted. It tastes like dirt. Where do the vegetables stand?
Probably dirt for her.
Like, would she actually say 0 though?
She probably would.
Okay, so you need to go even
Carmen.
more extreme and
Okay.
say like the worst pain you can imagine is a 0. What do you
Okay.
give the vegetables?
Okay, I'm gonna play along with you, even though I think Carmen would like
It might
run
not work.
circles around all of us. I will say maybe a 3.
Okay, really? 3.
Yes, 3.
That's weird. Why isn't it lower? Like, why
Uh,
isn't it a 0?
Why isn't it a 0? Because I don't want to eat poop.
Okay, yeah, that's
Like,
disgusting.
poop is worse.
But why else?
Because I don't know.
We're
You're
getting so
confusing
deep
me,
into like
that's the
some
problem.
something here.
So obviously, right kid, right age for it to work. But in counseling psychology, this is called motivational interviewing,
Okay.
where you ask a bunch of questions and you actually play the other side. So I'd be like, really? Because, these vegetables look horribly disgusting. Why that? Why would you ever want to touch them? And then they generate their own reasons for why it's not the worst thing in the world. And then you can motivate them on their terms as
Of
opposed
why
to yours.
to eat that? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm gonna try
It's worth a
it.
try.
That's fun.
Or I'm gonna kidnap you, bring you over to my house, and then maybe.
If it doesn't work, try it with Alec.
We asked something fun on the show, which is tell us your 3 of your favorite traditions with your family. Maybe they seem mundane or sort of just like every day, but they sort of set the tone for a safe and sound home. So what are some of your favorites?
Okay, so one we learned from Sheryl Sandberg actually, and her husband Dave when he was alive. When I first went to their house for dinner, they went around and said their favorite thing about the day, optional worst thing about the day, and then something they were grateful for. And we've loved doing that at the table. And then recently we've added who's someone you helped this week.
Ooh.
That's nice.
Because I think so often we're talking about like how sports are going or how grades are going, and we forget to emphasize this kindness theme. And so it's like, hey, we actually really care about something you did for someone else. And so I love that as a tradition. Second thing is I find that playing board games is one of my favorite ways to kind of continue a tradition that I learned growing up and that probably goes back in my family much further. And it's a great way just to unleash a little bit of friendly competition and say, look, we can want to win, but we can also be happy when somebody else in the family wins. And then if I had to choose a third, I would probably say it would be I'm so torn. I think writing is a good family tradition. So yeah, I've become a writer. Allison's been a writer since I met her, and each of our kids, as they've learned to write, has actually sat down and written stories to share with us. And so sometimes the bedtime story is one that they wrote instead of one that
we do this
yeah.
too.
You do?
So Philo and I wrote when she was like 3, wrote this. She came up with this idea of the party wolf. We wrote this whole book. I'm not even kidding. I can send it to you. Wrote this whole book about the party wolf, who's this poor lonely guy who loves to eat cake and never gets invited to any parties.
Really?
And so he goes around stealing cakes because he's like, I'll get the cake any which way I need to. And then he makes a friend and shares cake at her birthday, and it's even sweeter than and better than any cake he's ever
Really?
had because sharing it together makes the party that much more fun. But I will tell
It's
you,
amazing.
them writing, we got passed on by a bunch of publishers. We won't go
Oh,
there.
no.
But
I was gonna say, I feel like that wolf has been to our house. Where's the birthday cake always go?
But it was really fun to get to see her creativity come alive, and reading that book, which we read, at least once a week, means so much to them because and for her younger
She's
siblings,
an author.
she's an author, and she
Yeah.
got to illustrate and all this stuff. But I'm curious, since you are our first dad on the show and our first dude, I think as wives and as mothers and women, we think we see ourselves as being good and contributing, or good in certain ways that we think are really valuable, but may not ever be what you value on the other end. So I want you to tell us what's your favorite thing about Allison, or what does she do that just makes you fall in love with her every day? Because I think that's something that's really powerful for people who've been married for a long time to remember.
Oh, I have to choose really carefully on this one,
I
right?
know. Well, there's so
So,
many you could choose.
Yeah,
I know.
no, I don't want to choose the wrong one. So I think if off the top of my head, if I had to pick one, I would say it's the fact that every single time I have an idea, she tells me how badly it sucks. And I say
Sorry, I
that
shouldn't laugh.
no,
Okay,
no,
yes,
I mean
but-
seriously. I think that I've gotten to a point in my career now where a lot of the people that I work with are motivated to give me positive feedback.
Right.
Mhm.
And it's harder and harder to get people to tell me the truth. And one of the ways I see how much Allison loves me is she does not ever want me to put out something that isn't great.
But if it's a good idea, so it's not every single
Oh,
idea.
she gets
it's every
really
single,
excited about it when it's good.
about good ideas. Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
But that's easy, right? I think it's easy to spark to something that's obviously, an idea worth pursuing. And I think it's never, when somebody's excited about an idea, it's never easy to tell them that it's not any good. And she never hesitates on that. And I'm
Which
like,
makes you trust her more.
totally.
Yeah.
Because then when
Alec,
she
if
does
you're-
love it, I'm like, wow,
Alec,
this must
if
be
you're
decent.
listening, he's always like, "You're so hard on me," and I'm like, "Well, I want you
should
to
be.
trust me. Exactly. I want
Yeah.
you to be able to tell you, like, when I love your idea, it's because I really love it,
Yeah.
and when I don't love your idea, it's because it's bad."
Well, how
Yeah.
do you, Hilaria, and how does Allison support creativity then? Because you're both married to creatives. How does she nurture that for you?
Yeah, so the best thing that she often does is she'll read an article. Like I wrote an op-ed a couple months ago, and it was maybe 1,600 words. She's like this is not your best writing. And I started laughing, and I'm like, yeah, I didn't think most of this was working either. Should I scrap it? And she said, no, actually, there's a sentence right here, and it was like 3 pages in, maybe 3/4 of the way. She said, I think that's really interesting. You should write the whole article about this.
Wow.
And then I went and rewrote the whole article, and I was like, I
Wow.
never would have thought to do that without her advice.
I mean, that's the perfect example of your partner helps you be a better person,
I
huh?
love that.
That's really incredible.
And what's your favorite way about how she mothers?
Oh, I think the thing that Allison does that I always marvel at is she when our kids come home upset about something, the first thing she does is she sits there and asks them a bunch of questions, and she'll listen to what happened. And then she is just the fiercest advocate I could ever imagine. And so I constantly find myself responding to our kids when they're upset about something, and kind of wanting to say, oh, okay, it's either not a big deal or we can fix it. And her response is always, I have your back no matter what. This is not something you ever need to worry about. And it's just amazing how consistent she is in just sort of responding. I guess the simple way to say it is every time our kids are upset about something, what I get to watch her do is show them that the most important thing in the world to her is them and their happiness.
It's the mama bear.
Yeah, it's the mama bear effect. It's exactly what I was thinking about.
I love that. That should be your next. The mama bear effect is powerful, especially. I think it's always been powerful, but I think in this day and age, to have that sense of security that there is, that unflinching, unwavering support behind you as a parent for your children is so critical. I love that.
Yeah, and I don't feel like that loyalty comes as naturally to me, right? So I want to be supportive, but I also want to find out, is there another side to this story? Like the kid who hit you, did you hit them too? And she's like, I don't care.
Irrelevant point.
Probably deserved it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, good job, hit him again, right? But no, our job is to number one support.
That's why it's nice to have the two parents and two sides. That's really great. Something that I think all parents of now struggle with is technology, and being able to create boundaries with things like iPads. And I mean, I don't think our kids have gotten into gaming yet or any of that kind of thing. And then our own behavior on our devices. And how do we parent our children well, creating boundaries, but then also not being afraid of it? Because like I'd just be like, okay, we're just like never ever going to touch it, but then they'll be as bad with technology as I am, which is not a good skill to have.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of work on this. Adam Alter wrote a really neat book called Irresistible last year, which was all about how to deal with behavioral addictions to technology. And I think the takeaways from that I found useful, one is just have healthy boundaries around technology, right? So no phones at dinner is an easy example. And then the second is something that I ended up kind of deciding I guess I was in middle school when I decided this, and I've tried to carry it forward now, is I don't turn on the TV unless I already know what I'm going to watch.
Oh.
And there's no channel surfing that way. You don't get sucked into hours that just disappear. But it also, when I talk to our kids about that, it gets them to think about, what do I really want to watch?
Yeah.
And what's worth spending the time to focus on.
Intentional
and I think,
watching.
Yeah, exactly, which is way better than just whatever the network happens to serve to
Do you know that's true of eating also? And I feel like any kind of habit you have, if you set an intention around it, it's more pleasurable. Yeah. You derive more from it. It's not a meaningless waste of time.
It's a choice you made.
It's a choice you made, and I'm relaxing through
purpose.
this.
Doing it with a purpose.
I know we have to let you run to your many other people who are dying to talk to you. And you've packed so much into our space together. Leave us with one thing we can all be doing to parent a little better today.
Oh, it's always hard to boil it down to one thing. If I had to pick one thing that we haven't covered yet, I would probably say, I think, I guess for me, it goes back to, Daphne, something you raised earlier, which is about what happens when your kids get hungry or angry or hangry. I think that one of the things that parents really screw up, and that I struggle with all the time, is just normalizing emotion, right? When a kid gets upset, your first instinct is to want to make the emotion go away. And that doesn't actually help. And by the way, until you're an adult, you don't really have the neocortical capabilities to regulate those emotions. And so I think one of the things I've been trying to work on that I think is valuable for parents, regardless of what their kids are like, is to say, okay, it's normal, it's human to be angry. It's human to be sad, to be frustrated. And what we want to talk about is not how to make those emotions go away, but what causes them, how to deal with them constructively. And I think as kids get older, that's a skill you can help them build around emotional intelligence.
I love that.
Be good problem solvers.
Grant, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I love the fact that we have the same shoes.
It's the required footwear of Mom Brain. Gucci sneakers.
Or none.
I have
Gucci
those
sneakers
too.
or no shoes.
Where can our audience connect with you?
I have a website, adamgrant.net. I do a monthly newsletter on work and psychology, which has been a lot of fun to answer reader questions. I have a podcast called WorkLife, which is all about making work suck less. And I've written a few books, Give and Take, Originals, and Option B with Sheryl Sandberg.
And are all New York Times bestsellers, just throwing it out there.
Thanks for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.